Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are tackling a really critical and complex topic,
Mm.
the mechanics of abusive and toxic relationships. We're not just looking at isolated incidents. We're going to dissect the powerful, often invisible psychological bonds, the cognitive traps that make these situations so incredibly hard to leave, even when, intellectually, that you're in danger.
Exactly. And our source material for this deep dive is, well, it's pretty robust. We're looking at it from two sides. First, we have the clinical and theoretical frameworks, the how and why behind this psychological entrapment, drawing on some really foundational research. And the second part, which is just as vital, is a breakdown of highly practical, life-saving safety strategies, how to actually get out safely.
So our mission for you, the listener, is to really grasp these core concepts, everything from the classic cycle of abuse to some cutting-edge new research. And then we're going to synthesize all that into a detailed, personalized safety blueprint. Because the research is, it's unanimous on this.
Mm.
Understanding the abuser's strategy and planning ahead is absolutely critical for survival. Okay, so let's start by unpacking the roots of these ideas. To really get the trap, we need the map, right? And that map, for the most part, starts with Lenore E. Walker. She's just a monumental figure in this field. Her book, The Battered Woman, which came out back in 1979, was completely groundbreaking.
It really was. Walker's work gave the legal and clinical systems the language, the actual terminology they needed to even recognize what was happening. Her most famous contribution was defining battered woman syndrome, or BWS. She framed it as a specific subset of post-traumatic stress disorder, of PTSD.
Okay, and what does calling it a form of PTSD tell us about the psychological cost, I mean?
It tells us that the victim is living in a state of constant, unpredictable terror. And that leads to this feeling of helplessness and some pretty profound cognitive distortions. This was huge in legal cases, especially for self-defense. It helped courts understand that a history of abuse literally changes how you perceive danger and your ability to escape. It's a state of learned helplessness, but in a traumatic environment.
And it's that state of helplessness that lets her most famous concept, the cycle of abuse, really take hold. Can you lay out those 4 phases for us?
Yeah.
Because it's the repetition that keeps that lock in place, that keeps hope alive.
Sure. So the cycle, it starts subtly. Phase 1 is tension building. This is where you have small conflicts, stress escalating, and the victim is often trying to manage the abuser's mood just to prevent an explosion, walking on eggshells.
Right. And then comes phase 2.
The incident, the explosive abuse, physical, verbal, emotional, that releases all that built-up tension.
And then comes the part that feels like relief, but it's the most manipulative part of the whole cycle.
Oh, absolutely. That is phase 3, reconciliation. People often call it the honeymoon phase, which is a bit of a misnomer. The abuser apologizes, they promise it'll never happen again, they shower the victim with affection. This is the cognitive hook. It's the intense reward after the punishment.
And that reward pulls the victim right back in, which lets the cycle reset into phase 4, the calm.
Yes. That period of relative peace, it reinforces the victim's hope that the abuse was just a one-off thing, that the real partner is the loving one they're seeing now. So that hope is reignited and the memory of the violence starts to fade until the tension starts building again. It's the engine of the whole trap.
That leads us right into the more clinical idea of traumatic bonding. This goes beyond just the mechanics of the cycle and looks at the emotional glue holding it together. And it's not just attachment, it's a bond based on terror and unpredictability.
Right. And the research points to 2 key ingredients for creating a trauma bond. First, you need a clear power imbalance. The abuser systematically puts themselves in a position of control. This leads the victim to internalize the abuser's negative views of them. That self-blame, that feeling of worthlessness, it creates this intense dependency on the very person causing the harm.
And the second ingredient is what makes that dependency feel almost like an addiction.
That's intermittent reinforcement. Basically, the bad treatment is randomly mixed in with these really positive behaviors, kindness, affection, gifts. Because the victim never knows when that reward is coming, they become hyper-focused on getting it. It's like a gambler at a slot machine. Behavioral science shows that this kind of unpredictable reward schedule creates patterns that are incredibly hard to break. You're conditioned to cling to the hope of kindness returning.
Now, there's some very recent research that challenges how we look at all of this. Weaponized attachment. This is a new framework from 2025. What's the big shift here?
The shift is It's monumental.
Mm.
This framework moves the spotlight completely away from the victim's psychology, terms like codependency or asking why didn't they just leave.
Mm.
Instead, it focuses squarely on the intentional predatory strategy of the perpetrator.
So it's not a dysfunctional relationship that just sort of happens. It's a deliberately engineered system of control.
Precisely. The emotional bond itself is seen as a strategic tool, a system of coercive control that the abuser builds on purpose. And often this happens before any overt abuse is even recognizable. The abuser creates this two-faced soulmate persona, intense affection 1 minute, sudden hostility the next, specifically to maintain control without always needing to use physical force. It reframes the bond as something that is produced by the abuser to guarantee compliance.
That's a huge distinction. Strategic engineering versus just dysfunction.
Yeah.
Okay, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about language. Toxic relationship is a popular term, but it's vague. Clinicians often prefer dysfunctional.
Yeah.
But I think the popularity shows that people are desperate for a label for these experiences that just don't make sense.
And often that toxicity comes from some very specific personality traits. The research points to what's called the dark triad. That's Machiavellianism, psychopathy, and narcissism. And they might all stem from a common psychological core, the D factor.
The D factor, tell me more about that.
Well, the B factor, the dark factor, is basically the tendency to maximize your own self-interest at the expense of others. And it comes with a whole set of beliefs that justify those behaviors. These individuals are manipulative, and they're very, very good at finding and exploiting a partner's weaknesses.
And that exploitation has a pattern, a playbook. The sources list some clear warning signs, starting with that really intense early phase.
It starts with love bombing. This is just overwhelming affection, constant contact, putting the partner on a pedestal right from the get-go. It feels incredibly romantic, but its real purpose is to break down your natural defenses and your judgment.
That intensity then rushes into fast pacing, pushing for big milestones way too quickly, moving in together, talking marriage within weeks.
Yes, it's designed to lock in commitment before you have a chance to really assess the situation. And once that commitment is there, the psychological tactics ramp up. You see gaslighting twisting reality, making you doubt your own memory, and you see constant criticism.
Ugh, the relentless chipping away at your self-worth.
Absolutely. It starts small, maybe with your clothes, and then it escalates to how you talk, how you eat, your personality. It's designed to lower self-esteem and increase dependency. And then the final critical tool, isolation, cutting you off from your support system, friends, family.
The psychological fallout from all this it's severe. What does the research say about the long-term impact on someone's mental health?
Well, the chronic stress alone manifests physically. Headaches, sleep problems, digestive issues. Mentally, the abuse is a direct trigger for severe anxiety, depression, and chronically low self-esteem.
And the sources also detail what happens when the relationship finally ends, a condition they call love trauma syndrome, or LTS.
Yeah.
It sounds intense.
It is. It's an acute shock that happens after the breakup. It shatters your sense of security, even if the relationship was harmful. The reaction is like a traumatic event. Panic, helplessness, even physical symptoms like tremors. And the emotional aftermath usually follows the classic stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and hopefully acceptance.
Okay, so we've mapped out the problem pretty clearly. Let's pivot to the solution. How do you heal from this? The research points very clearly to one therapeutic approach in particular: cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT.
Yes, that's a key finding. One study looked at university students with LTS symptoms, and CBT was highly effective. It led to significant improvements in self-esteem and major reductions in anxiety and depression. And importantly, those improvements held up 3 months later, which suggests it has a lasting effect.
So let's break that down. Why does CBT work so well for this specific kind of trauma?
It works because it directly targets the cognitive damage from the abuse. It goes after the maladaptive cognitive responses, the irrational beliefs that have taken root. Things like personalization, where you blame yourself for everything, or catastrophizing, where you assume the worst will always happen. These distorted thoughts literally poison your thinking, tank your self-worth, and make you isolate yourself.
So the therapy's goal is to basically dismantle those poisoned thoughts one by one. The sources mentioned a few specific CBT techniques.
Right. A fundamental one is the ABC model. A is the activating event, like the abuser says you're worthless. B is your belief about that event, like I must be worthless. And C is the emotional consequence, like depression. CBT helps you see that it's B, your belief, that's driving C, the feeling. not the event itself.
That makes so much sense.
Another one is the vertical arrow technique, which is a way to dig down past the surface thoughts to find the really deep core beliefs like, I am unlovable. By identifying and then challenging those illogical thoughts, you can start to reclaim your own mind.
And beyond therapy, the sources also stress practical, everyday strategies. Things like learning to set boundaries.
Yes, you have to identify your needs, communicate your limits clearly, and this is the hardest part, enforce them consistently. You also have to relearn to trust your instincts. Coercive control trains you to ignore those internal red flags. Recognizing them early is a huge step. And of course, seek professional help. Therapy, support groups, rebuilding that social connection that was taken from you.
We've spent a lot of time on the mental trap and the path out, but now we have to turn to physical safety. The sources are very, very clear that this is often the most dangerous part of the whole process.
It is. The warning is stark. Leaving is often the most dangerous time. The abuser is losing control, and the risk of violence skyrockets. So advanced planning isn't just a good idea, it's mandatory. We synthesized a safety plan from our sources, starting with what to do during a violent incident.
What are the main rules for staying safe in that crisis moment?
First, if you can, move any argument to a low-risk location, somewhere with an easy exit. You have to avoid places you can be trapped, like the bathroom, or places with weapons, like the kitchen or the garage.
And you need to have an exit strategy practiced in your mind.
You do. Know your escape routes. And keep an emergency bag ready, keys, money, phone in a hidden spot you can grab and go. Have a code word with your kids or a friend that signals they need to call the police without you having to say it out loud. And sometimes the hardest truth is that the safest immediate action is to placate the abuser, to give them what they want just long enough for you to get out safely.
Okay, now let's move to the next phase. Safety when preparing to leave. This is all about securing your independence.
And financial independence is priority number one. You need to open a bank account in your name only at a different bank. And the sources stress a really important legal point. Any money you take from a joint account before you leave is legal. If you leave it, the abuser can often legally take it all and close the account, leaving you with nothing.
And what about digital privacy? That seems just as critical now.
Oh, absolutely. Don't use a shared phone plan to make calls after you leave. The bill will show every number you called, which can lead the abuser right to your new support network. Use a burner phone, pay phones, a friend's phone, anything to keep your communications private.
And documentation is key.
Before you go, leave copies of every vital document. Birth certificates, passports, social security cards, custody papers with someone you trust. And have a grab bag ready with the essentials: money, ID, any medication, and a copy of any protection order you have.
Finally, let's talk about safety in your new residence after you're out.
Security has to be immediate. Change every single lock. If you can, upgrade to stronger doors, get a security system, outdoor lighting. For child protection, you have to inform schools, daycares, babysitters in writing exactly who is allowed to pick up your children and specify that your former partner is not. Back it up with any custody orders you have.
And the legal documents, like an order of protection, how critical is that?
It is your shield. You have to keep it on you or near you at all times. It should be the first thing you put in a new purse. And you need to give copies to the police departments in every town you frequent, where you live, where you work, where you visit. It ensures they can enforce it immediately, no matter where you are.
This has been a really tough, but I think incredibly necessary deep dive. We've gone from the academic understanding of these psychological bonds to the empowerment that comes from detailed, life-saving planning. The takeaway seems to be that the trap is real, but it is survivable, and planning is what makes the difference.
And if you're going through this, please know that feeling confused or grieving or even missing the abuser, that's all a normal part of this process. It reflects the power of that conditioning. It is not a personal failure, and it is not a sign that you deserve anything less than safety and respect, period.
So we talked about how effective CBT is for treating the symptoms, the anxiety and depression that come from this kind of trauma. But if we take that newer weaponized attachment framework seriously, the idea that this is all an intentional strategy by the perpetrator, what if the therapy shifted? What if, instead of focusing on healing the victim's pain, we focused on deconstructing the perpetrator's system of influence? What kind of massive societal changes would we need for our legal and mental health systems to fully adopt that perpetrator-centric view of harm, instead of just asking why the victim stayed? Something for you to think about.